Welcome to TUREC 2024. So if you could hit the next slide. Awesome. So if you guys could take a moment to read the land acknowledgement statement. Alrighty, if you could change the slide. Awesome. So welcome to
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Post-Award Best Practices for Collaborative Management of HHS Awards. My name is Fernando Zacarias. I'm a Research Advancement Manager with the College of Health Solutions at Arizona State University. I fell into research administration in the central office at the University of Arizona, starting as a student worker. I worked in both pre and post-award, and I am in the post-award team now in CHS. My 5-year anniversary was just last week. And I also have about 8 years of experience in accounting. And I'll pass it off to Elena to introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Elena Davis. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to be here. I am also a Research Advancement Manager with the College of Health Solutions at Arizona State University. I have been at ASU for almost 9 years in May. I started here in the accounting, but then within a couple of years, I went over to the research advancement side. The first position I was in was a full cradle to grave position, but for the majority of my time at ASU, I have been a post-award role.
Welcome to our session. My name is Lisa Allen. I'm the Associate Director for Research Administration at the College of Health Solutions, and I'm happy to be co-presenting here with my other team members. I have been in research administration for the past almost 20 years. I came to ASU 6 years ago, and we're going to dive into some collaborations and how we work with other areas.
So we are housed essentially at the unit level, even though we are for the entire college, but we do have a central office, and that's the way that our model at ASU is structured. What we're going to be going over today are some of the learning lessons that we've encountered in working with primarily NIH and HHS heavy awards. We're going to be discussing implementing effective and proactive pre to post transitions. So before I came to CHS, having kickoff meetings when we received new awards was always a dream when there was more time, when we had more manpower. And we've actually implemented it here, and we've created a very succinct document that serves to lead that meeting very effectively. And we're going to share that with you today. We'll also discuss establishing expectations and routines for award monitoring and the stakeholders that are involved in that function. And then we're going to be sharing sponsor-specific resources and documents that get into the real nitty-gritty of some of the things that we've seen, and without having to go into it in the weeds here with you. So with that, I will pass it off to Elena to begin our transition and kickoff meeting discussion.
So before the pre to post-award kickoff meeting with the PI, there are steps taken to prepare for it. Our amazing pre-award team reads the NOA in full, and then begins filling out the new award portfolio. After we receive the award activation notice, pre and post will meet with the PI and their faculty to go over this 5-page document. The purpose of this meeting is to hand off from the pre-award team to the post-award team and include the PI so all parties are on the same page. We go over this award in detail and assign what the action items are to be completed to ensure the award can start off on the correct path and the next steps can begin. And before we go any further today, so I will be going over this document with you, and we are also going to be sharing the document with everybody today for you guys to take to your university and use or in your units. There are areas in this document that are specific to our unit and ASU, but it is still a resource that I think is very valuable and you guys will really appreciate to have. Coming from a cradle to grave myself and other units, it has always been something. Additionally, to echo Fernando, I wish I had this document. I wish we had the time to put this together.
And before you go to the next slide, Elena, I just want to preface by this is that if you are having issues related to confusion you know, some chaos, some communication breakdowns. So those types of things are really what this meeting is designed to help navigate. And also, it's the onus on us. You know, we know that we would love to decrease the administrative burden for our PIs and the research support staff. So that's what we strive to do by having this process in place.
While explaining step-by-step our process of filling out this document used by the College of Health Solutions at Arizona State University, we would also like to ask you this question and how you handle this process. If you could please share, how do you communicate or connect with your PI during the pre to post award transition? And then at any time during this meeting, if you have time to add that into the chat, share with others so that they can have other ideas of how to do that, and we can discuss it potentially later. We start by filling out the first page with the general grant information. So we're going to add the grant title, the sponsor, the ASU PI, and if there are any co-investigators to this document. The funding proposal number, sponsor award number, the ASU award number, as well as the grant count number. The agreement type, whether that is a grant, cooperative, or contract, a award type, whether that is federal, industry, or nonprofit, the period of performance, the budget period, the total award, and then the first funding increment if that applies. The last portion of this we are going to add is who their pre-award individual that they were working with on this award, and then who their post-award individual will be. And this is all on this page is the general information that the faculty really needs to keep and have. And this document they will have for the life of the award. So they can continue to go back to this document and use this document as reference items, not only the importance of just the grant numbers or the award numbers, but as I go through the document, you will see what the other benefits to it is. Other things I would like to add is we do this new award portfolio or NAP per grant award. So not depending on the sponsor, it's every sponsor that this is filled out for. The pre-award team will read through that NOA and again fill out this document. There are situations where there is not a kickoff meeting that takes place, and that is usually when it has to do with an award coming through that is only a salaried award. And so there's an email sent to the faculty member letting them know, here is your NAP agreement. Would you like to meet for this? Or if you understand, please sign and send that back to us. When going over this document, you're going to see that there are links that I will mention. Those are mostly ASU links, ORSPA links. CHS has their own internet. So on the post-award side of things, there are items that the faculty member would submit and need those links, as well as other resources. But those are all changes that can be made. They are just specific to our unit and help our faculties with the process of their awards. The last thing I'd like to add about this document, it is something that we review quarterly and links are checked. So pre and post award are in discussions when we have our meetings to see if there is any updates that ever need to occur to this document. So this document is always changing to better us as well as the faculty and how we can best serve them and give them those resources.
And I'd like to add that we are not only going to make this form available to you, but we're also gifting you with a nap. A nap because there's no sleeping on the job. And this is the only time that you'll ever be able to use those terminologies and get away with it. So please have a nap.
Don't let your PIs nap on this document.
The next area of the NAP is the award characteristics, starting with the no-cost extension. We would want to note on what page we are finding that information on the NOA. We would also write if there is a deadline for that no-cost extension. It is also important to note whether there is a carry forward automatically, so it's allowable, or if it's something that needs to be requested. And so we would mark what is the action needed to go forward with that carry forward if it is not an already automatic option. If there are any intellectual properties then we would want to make sure to mark yes and what page number that this occurs on. And then there's a note section for the faculty member if there's any specific federal requirements. We want to make sure that the PI knows those requirements, what page number to be found on. And a great thing that our pre-award team does when they're reviewing this document and completing the NAP is they add the page number, as I said, notes, but they also highlight that NOA in the places for them to easily spot it once they go to that page number. The last item on this slide is the prior approval. So we would mark whether there is a requirement to get the written prior approval, what page number that can be found on, and then if there's anything special to consider when asking for that prior approval.
You may be wondering to yourself, why would we be discussing a no-cost extension at the award activation stage? But believe me, it happens. And there are a number of circumstances why, some being that it's a sub-award that took several months to execute, that there was a delay in getting approvals for IRB. The pandemic led to a lot of delays. So we have seen where we are at the activation stage, and we already know that we are going to need a no-cost extension. So that's why that's one of the reasons why we've added this to the form, because if we anticipate it, then we can know to put it on our calendars to request it when the time comes.
The next part of the document is the research integrity and assurances portion. So we would mark whether the following are going to pertain to this grant. So if there's IRB for human subjects, ICOOK for animals, IBC for biohazardous materials. We have a notes section if those do apply to this award, and we would note if there was anything special to consider. And then there's also, as I've stated, resources for the faculty member at the bottom of those sections. So here is the resource for that faculty member. There are instances where they will not have a completed IRB protocol. It's normally when we have a kickoff meeting, they are completed. But during some awards, they may not be pertaining to the first year of that grant, and it would be a second year. And so that would be that special note that we would add in here. Potentially the IRB is still pending. It's human subjects for the second year. So that is just the pre-award individual letting the post-award individual know this is still a pending action item, and we need to make sure that we're keeping a pulse on it. The faculty member is aware, the pre and post-award are now aware, and making sure that prior to that next year's funding, that IRB is completed.
Yeah, we often see that happen when another institution is the IRB of record, and we're waiting for them to provide us with that kind of documentation. There are also times, especially again with the pandemic, where the IRB study had to be revised and it was a fluid motion. And so we still wanted to expense payroll because time was being dedicated to the project and being reactionary and revising those IRB studies. So we did load that portion of the budget, but we coordinated with our central office to make sure that the portion that was designated for the human subject compensation was not included.
The next section that we have is the foreign components. And if there were any foreign components related to this grant, we would say yes, what that country is and whether that country is restricted. There are notes for them to be aware of as well. So we would go ahead and mark if there is anything to consider regarding this foreign travel, this foreign component, and then also resources available for them below this section. Next are the publication restrictions. And then if there were to be any publication restriction, then we would have them mark yes, what page that's to be found on the NOA, and then details of those restrictions for the faculty member so that they are aware of that. This brings us to the conflict of interest. At this time during the meeting, the pre-award individual will ask the PI if there are any conflicts of interest at this time that apply. The PI would answer, we would hope no. And then also the pre-award individual will be double checking to make sure that the COI management plan has been approved. And if it has not been approved, then that would be an action item for the post-award person to follow up with. And we can talk about the tasks for those individuals at the end of this lovely document. And then finally, we have the bottom portion for the faculty member and a link for them.
I did want to interject that some of our new awards may not be complicated, may not have each of these components, we still would review that and say it didn't apply. We look at it as a learning opportunity as well, especially when we have junior faculty coming in, doing, having new grants or what have you. It gives them an opportunity to see what they could look forward to in terms of items that might be included in a future grant proposal or budget. So for instance, if there's no foreign component that applies for this particular award that we're having a kickoff meeting about, they would at least have some understanding of what would be required if in a future grant submission this would apply.
Yeah, and so while the document isn't intended to be necessarily fully exhaustive, it is something that, as Elena mentioned, we do review on a routine basis. And in looking at even now, I think that we might evaluate the foreign components section to ask, do we have subawards that are international? Because NIH implemented in calendar year 2024 requirement that they share all lab notes, all data, access to all the information and research that they developed, and it be included in the RPPR, or the annual progress report, which is a new requirement. Or we also have international consultants, and that requires other considerations in terms of export controls, in terms of onboarding them in our financial systems and the tax implications there. And there are also some awards that we've seen that it's not necessarily a publication restriction, but a publication requirement, and that they have a certain number of publications, or they submit a certain number of publications by a certain timeline.
The next slide brings us to reporting and deliverables. Reviewing the award, we would note if there are any annual or interim reporting needs, and mark those details for the faculty member to be aware of, as well as the final reporting and any project deliverables needed would also be noted for that faculty member. Depending on, because this is not just an NIH sheet, this is for all awards that are coming in for that faculty member. There are some unique situations when it comes to deliverables, what the reporting is like for that sponsor. So we want to be aware as a post-award individual, so pre-award is sharing that with us, but also the PI needs to make sure that they are anticipating when these deliverables, when those reports are due. Then that brings us to the budget characteristics, and we would ask the faculty member at this time if there is a budget revision needed. We would hope that at the pre-award stage of things that the budget was what it needed to be, and it still looks to be that there is no revision. But we ask that because things do change, plans do change. The award that they're being given may have decreased in a fashion that they need to make a budget revision due to the amount of money that they now are going to be having. So we want to make sure to ask that at the beginning. So that's something that pre-award would have a task of working with that PI to complete that. And then the last portion that we have is called the biostatistics core budgeted. So this is really something pertaining to ASU. They are one of our recharge centers. It's unique, but that's something that we added to this sheet so that we were able to know this is a individual that needs to be updated for position accounting, needs to be budgeted off of this account number. So it's a note to the post-award team. This is an action item that we need to make sure that we take.
When I transitioned into an NIH heavy portfolio, having come from a place where it was primarily NASA and NSF, one of the surprising things to me was that the annual progress report is actually due 45 days before the end of the current budget period, as opposed to after the end of the budget period. And it's because that RPPR is what triggers the next year NOAA. So this is something that if you are new to NIH or HHS, it's a deadline that is not as intuitive as you might think. And as Elena mentioned, that since this document can be used for the entire gamut of sponsors, we've seen an uptick in sponsors that require you to upload the progress report into their portal. And so it's very useful to include that information here so that your faculty know, and they can refer back to it when they get to started in that process.
Great. The next portion that we have of this document is the accounting position. I know most of our awards, when we're getting them in, do have effort. And so this is a section we would be talking with the faculty. The pre-award individual fills out this document for us. As I've stated, And so hopefully we have the name of the individual, what that percentage of effort is going to be, and then that period that they would like to have this effort updated on that grant. There are occasions where they don't have the individual, so we would put TBD for hiring. And we would still ask the faculty member if they had an idea of what that effort is going to be, that percentage for that individual, and then the time period they were wanting to hire that person. Normally, this document would look something like the faculty member is taking time in the summer. This GRA is going to be during the fall session. The student is going to be during the summer session. And so making sure we're marking all of those things. And then that's a post-award task that I would talk to the faculty about to make sure that we get all of those people mapped to the account. At the beginning of our first meeting, we would make sure those actions are completed or on the task to be completed. We get to our favorite part, cost share. So on this document, we have cost share. If cost share was related to this award, we would mark yes. We would write that cost description and then the total for that cost share. And then the links below are for the faculty member, again, just for them to have those resources all in one place. This would also trigger a post-award task. And so this is the post-award individual needing to make sure that that cost share account is set up and ready to go. So at this time, we already have the main account open, but there could be other potential accounts that need to come online. And so this is one of those post-award actions, which is that cost share account. The last portion of this slide would be our consultants and the names of those individuals. During the proposal development with pre-award, they tried very hard to make sure that we get all of this information. So the faculty member already has an idea of who those consultants are. So what is their name? They're named in the proposal, we hope, so we would mark yes. What their email address is, period of performance, and then the total cost for that individual. If we were not aware of who the individual was, but the faculty member knew they needed a consultant, that would just be a TBD. And we would go from there on helping the faculty member on the next steps, whether it is somebody they know, and we can work with that individual starting at a post-award task soon, or we would have them ask them to identify that person as soon as possible so that we can start those documents with them.
I sometimes also use the term consultant a little loosely when we're having these meetings, because I would consider people who are going to be on an advisory board to be issued, and if they're going to be issued compensation, I would consider them a consultant in terms of the way that it's going to expense, and so I would add them to this section as well.
Great. The next section that we have is for the contracts. And if we do have a subcontract pertaining to this grant, we would mark yes. The institution, the grant account number, the PI, their email, the period of performance for this subcontract, and then the total awarded amount for them. There are a couple of reasons we want to make sure that we have the grant award number listed here, making sure that it is already set up or is starting the stages of getting set up. So it could potentially be a pre or post award task. If you're checking the status and you see that there is a pending subaward task, then the subawards team is needed to be reached out to make sure that we are able to move forward with the process for when the subawards need to submit an invoice for us regarding this project. So that is something that the pre-award team would look into. The post-award team may prepare and look into that prior to this meeting just to see if this is an item that needs to be addressed or if it's already completed and ready to move forward. And then below we have links for the faculty member as well if they have any questions. This slide is regarding the post-award tasks. So for a majority of the document, the pre-award individual is leading of the different sections that we have been speaking about. This is the area where the post-award person normally can take over for this portion of this page to discuss the things that pertain to this grant account. So some of these items are going to be on here. All of them might be on that grant account. And so at CHS, we have an internet site that the faculty use, and there are requests the faculty can submit on our internet, and the post-award will guide them on how to use those documents where they are located. So pertaining to that grant, there could be that personnel mapping or hiring. If there are purchases that need to be made or reimbursements, if they are going to be needing a P card, which is a university credit card, whether the faculty would be assigned that credit card or our financial unit has access to that and can just use their credit card. If there are any travel questions, consultant requirements that they have questions about, and then if there are any gift cards related to this grant account. So this is really the area where the post-award person has looked at the budget prior to this meeting, and they are ready to talk to that faculty member to discuss what is going to be required for their grant.
And just to clarify, after the fact reporting is ASU's mechanism by which we record efforts.
The last section of this document, we have a statement regarding ASU's closeout process, ASU's policy, so that the PI is aware of that. And then our first-time PIs also are aware that there is a closeout process and there are things that they need to be watching out for in their emails. And that's something the post-award team is able to help them with when they see those items come into their inbox. The next section we have is a section where we're going to be assigning the tasks we've been talking about during this meeting. So those tasks can be the hiring, biostat mapping, consultant setup, subaward status, making sure that those invoices are ready to go for that subaward when they are ready to start billing us. And then if the PI had any other questions brought up during the meeting, we would add those questions and who would handle those that question for that faculty member. So normally the people that you'll see assigned to this are pre-award, post-award, and even the PI might have an action item that they're going to need to take care of. And so we would list that all in the document here. Another thing that this kind of brings to mind at this time during the meeting is the post-award and the faculty member are going to want to start having a monthly meeting, a reoccurring meeting, to make sure that we are managing of this award and then whatever awards they might have. Normally they are a monthly meeting, but it also depends on the activity of the grant account. If they have won a grant account and it is a salaried account potentially in the summer, it might not be a monthly meeting, but for the majority, we tell ourselves and the other individuals that work with CHS as a post-award, a monthly meeting is what we would like to see to make sure we keep a pulse on this award. And if they have any questions, we're able to answer those quickly. Another thing that we bring to that first meeting with the faculty member is I would be reviewing the accounts to make sure every account is set up and ready to go, including that subaward account if there are still documents required, checking to make sure in our systems that the F&A has been updated correctly. And if there was a participant support related to this grant account, making sure that separate account has been created so that everything is running smoothly for that faculty member. Another item that we have for the end of this document is that our pre-award team puts together the budget justification, the NOA, and they put all of this into an email at the end of our pre to post award kickoff. And then they ask that the faculty member review this document once again, sign it and send it back to us. So this is acknowledging that we met, had this kickoff meeting and went into detail over their project. They will have a copy of this document to refer back to. And then they also know what the next steps are, the tasks are assigned. And this document is just it has all of the resources they need in that one place, in this one document for the life cycle of that account. The last thing we ask is that once they sign the document, they send it back to us. Pre-award will go ahead and save it into the faculty's folder that both pre and post-award have access to so that we have a record of what we've discussed in this meeting. And then the last couple things I'd like to add is, as Lisa had stated, this document, it's very long-winded of what I just went over, but it does not pertain to every grant account. It was just an example today of how we go over the items if they pertain to that grant and how we would fill those out. When using this document here at CHS, I had said I was a cradle to grave. And this is something in that position, as well as my other post-award positions, I wish I would have had, even as a cradle to grave individual and managing so many different accounts with different faculty and trying to make sure that I am remembering what that said in the NOA or having to go back constantly to look at that NOA. If I would have had this document and filled it out and taken the time to add all those special notes, it would have saved me a lot of time. And so I'm grateful at CHS that we have this document. And then one last thing I'd like to say is that the faculty member here are assigned one post-award RA for the life of their time at CHS. So this helps build a trusting relationship with that post-award individual and that PI, and for the life cycle of every grant, making sure that we're on the same page and it's running smoothly. And this is our lovely pre to post award document, and I hope you guys are as excited as we are to have this in use. And thank you. Lisa and Fernando, did you have anything?
I was just going to add that the theme of the day in being at the conference here yesterday and today, and probably any other conference that I've been at, is communication. Communication is key to us, our success as research administrators. And as you can see by this document, there's a lot of communication going on, not just with the PI, but between the pre and the post-award team. Not only do we use this document with our communication, but we have weekly meetings. All that is so key. I've heard comments about other areas that have their pre-award team and they have their post-award team, and that how to navigate that. But at the end of the day, they're all one team. They're all working together for the common good of the organization, for the PI, for the research. And so really, there should be no gaps there. There's not a whole lot of room for it, because at the end of the day, we're creating more work for ourselves by having those gaps. And so with this document and with those meetings, it has been highly effective in lessening or making our loads easier.
Yeah, I agree that this document at its core is a resource, but it also adds accountability for all the parties involved. This isn't a meeting that necessarily needs to be just with pre, post, and the PI. Sometimes we have co-investigators from other units who are invited to the meeting, and they may have assigned tasks like begin recruiting a graduate student or begin identifying community stakeholders. They might have programmatic support staff that they want included in the meeting, and that person has to submit hire tickets, things of that nature. One thing that Elena did touch on that I want to expand on, though, is that what we've learned over time is that when there are specific budget categories, in particular participant support costs, that we would ask that our central office designate a new account specifically for those funds. One of the things that we've encountered is that a function of our travel system is that by default, it will expense to a travel spend category or object code, which, as we know, is subject to F&A. So instead, by having this separate account with an overridden F&A rate of 0%, we can avoid all of the cost transfers that are necessary to correct that. So that might be a task that we add here for ourselves in coordinating with them if we realize that they loaded all of the budget into just one account.
So if the PI keeps this document handy on either desktop, a file, or what have you, keep it open. They don't have to, we have resources out on our internet site that they can use as well. But this can pretty much be a one-stop shop. As you saw through the entire document, there was links to other resources, to background information that they could access as well. So yeah, it's been very helpful for us.
And with that, we'll begin the conversation of establishing expectations and routines. And this isn't just with your PI, it's with all of the people who are involved in an award life cycle. So first is establishing a good relationship with your PI. And how do you go about doing that? Now, the way that I go about it is being invested in their success. I will read their project summaries when they get a new award, or if their portfolio is transferring to me, I'll ask questions. In that kickoff meeting that we have with them, I'll ask them, what are the goals? What are the timelines? How can we help you? And in getting more familiar with their work, it's going to show that you're invested in their success. You're not just a roadblock to them accessing their funds. In fact, you'll even begin over time to be able to provide advice for them. If they have an idea about how to compensate human subjects, you can say, maybe this is a better idea. This mechanism might be a better incentive to your targeted population. Then remind them over and over at every opportunity that you can that you're here to help them, that you're here to make sure that they are compliant and that you are protecting the institution, the dean, the university president, and that you are helping them to be a resource and making sure that they are successful but compliant. We serve as their liaison to so many different offices and so many experts within the institution that we can direct them to where they need to go if they have questions. Some of these individuals may not have taken an accounting or a business class in over 10 years. So while they are geniuses and they're smart and they're subject matter experts, they may not necessarily be as readily informed about general accounting practices at an institution like ASU. Some of the other scenarios that I've encountered in where PIs come to me and ask for guidance is on, I had a PI who, for example, was implementing a recruitment for a human subject study, and they wanted to advertise on Facebook, and it was going to have the university logo on that. So what they may not have realized was that in doing so, you now have to adhere to the institution's branding standards. So making sure that they know, okay, if you're going to be using ASU's logo, you need to contact our marketing team. Another scenario would be if we have a training grant and you're going to issue offer letters to the potential trainees, what that letter needs to include so that it is approved by tax services, by our central office, by accounts payable, to ensure that we are compliant in what the milestones are and what the expectations are. Some of the hard lessons we've learned were, for example, that if a trainee was going to receive a $10,000 stipend over an academic year, that we do not want to be in the habit of issuing them a full $5,000 in the beginning of one semester, and then we have people drop off of the award. And that's not good stewardship of funds, because those funds are gone and we now cannot recruit another person for that semester. So in having these discussions with them, we can say, let's instead tie it to deliverables, or let's instead tie it to a monthly stipend. And in that way, we help them become more compliant and successful. One of my colleagues in post-award has a really great analogy where he says, if you are ever asked to approve something, or you're thinking about doing something, you're unsure about it, or you need to certify something and it looks unfamiliar to you, think of us as your lawyers on retainer. Give us a call. We'll help you. We'll guide you through it. We'll let you know if this is something that you can click yes on. It's easier just to ask questions. That's what we're here for.
So we have a return on investment on this presentation itself. Fernando, since you brought it up, we had a question yesterday in another session about gift cards versus cash. And if a PI asks you that, since we have both post-award managers on the line here, what would you say?
It depends, I think, on the population that's being targeted. For example, I support an investigator who studies people who have substance use disorder. And so they don't necessarily need Amazon gift cards. They need cash because of the nature of their lifestyle and their circumstance. Or a target population that's minority, and there's a little bit of mistrust of the government, and especially if they know that it's federally funded. And so they don't want something issued to them via cash, or via check, or sent to their email. They prefer cash in that case as well. So I think as long as we can navigate those discussions, let them know that they should include it in their IRB or submit an IRB modification, and what the responsibilities are involved when working with cash as a custodian of those funds.
I agree. I think it's also considering, again, who the population you're working with. Do they get a gift card and they have to wait for the processing of that gift card, or is the cash on hand at that study that they're at, and it's something they can get to that day and they need to pay a bill? And so that's also another option, something to consider when thinking of that population. Is a gift card takes how many days to process with Workday, whereas a cash is something that is given to them at the end of that day on the study.
Another factor, though, is volume. If you're going to be recruiting people to be survey respondents and you expect a response size of more than 500, certainly cash and gift cards, physical gift cards, are not going to be a very efficient system by which to disseminate those funds. So I would certainly, in that case, suggest electronic gift cards.
Thank you. Hopefully the people online for yesterday have received that feedback.
So aside from building trust with your PI, in tandem with that is communication with the PI. Our PIs are responsible for the overall scientific execution of the project, the scientific, integrity of the project. And they are the individual assigned the authority to approve expenditure of the grant funds. And we've seen that with some of our more large portfolio investigators, that they will begin to delegate tasks to support staff or to postdocs or to graduate students. But it's important for them to realize that they're where the buck stops. Keep in mind that just because they are the final approver of expenditures does not mean that they would not be liable, that the institution would not be liable, that we as RAs would not be liable if in an audit things were found to be unallowable. So we are part resource and part sheriff, which is a nod to Woody here. And so we have a heavy responsibility to be well-versed in things like the nuances of subject pay and training stipends and working with international collaborators. So I think as where you are on the spectrum of experience, being ready and aware of what you may not know, and then thinking about where can I find the information that might help guide these conversations, because some of these topics, in terms of our familiarity, it'll be a mile wide and an inch deep. So as long as you know a little bit of where there could be potential compliance issues, that would be in your best interest to be steadfast in reviewing these expenditures and these policies. For example, for human subject pay policies, we have reporting requirements. If we anticipate that in a given calendar year, the compensation is going to exceed $600. And that's because human subject pay is considered compensatory payments. So we do have a legal requirement to report that to the IRS on a calendar year basis if it exceeds that threshold. And then being aware of—
I think Fernando froze. There you go.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. And then being aware of award restrictions. Some of our awards, we have been seeing an increase in NIH issuing budget cuts, which is really unfortunate because the aims are still expected to be maintained. The level of effort that was proposed is expected to be maintained. And so what we often will default to is requesting an administrative supplement, or if a PI has a student in mind that they want to mentor, requesting a diversity supplement. Those funds are very restricted though. They require separate accounts. They have specified periods of performance and intended purposes. The same is true of training grants. There are, as I advise and suggest, creating a separate account for those participant support costs is very helpful in maintaining that you don't overspend on one side of the budget that then taps into those funds. So having a clear line there. Our dean has been very encouraging and our faculty have been very successful in getting an increased amount of training grants. So this is something that we are still navigating and refining, but it does have a lot of nuances. Then making sure that effort is being maintained. As I mentioned, if there are budget cuts, the proposed level of effort is still expected to be maintained. So that's a conversation you can have at the kickoff stage or as you go into subsequent budget periods if you realize that there isn't enough funding to support the level of effort that's required for a given budget period. Do we need to go to the sponsor and ask for revised aims or a reduction in effort? The same is true for our subawards. Are they maintaining their effort? That's not something that we are readily monitoring because when we receive their invoices, salary and personnel costs are lumped together. So we don't know if that's necessarily investigator salary or if that's graduate students, postdocs, so on. And then having those recurring check-in meetings with Elena. We have faculty who they love to meet every month. We have some who prefer to meet every other month or quarterly, or only when there are big events coming up like summer pay and they want to discuss how they're going to be compensated during that period. I also have faculty who prefer just to receive an email with their updated budget balances because their award maybe is just for personnel costs. And so those awards are what I consider to be autopilot because you update payroll mapping once and as you progress through the budget period, those expenditures accumulate. And so everything's fine. And then lastly, one of the things that we do, our leadership implements a researcher alert. And this is something that is very targeted and strategic because we don't want it to be so recurring that it goes out every month, because then we've noticed that our faculty are not as attuned to reading it. It does not impress upon them the urgency or the importance as we have seen with other kinds of newsletters. So we keep it succinct, we keep it important, we keep it timely, and only with important updates if necessary. So this is something that I would encourage you to implement with your faculty as well. Anything to add?
No, I think you covered it succinctly. Very good.
Thank you. And aside from communication with your investigators is then communication with others. And these are other stakeholders and people involved in the management of an award. So you're going to want to make friends with your counterparts at sub-award institutions. We rely on them heavily, especially with NIH. As I mentioned, our PPRs with the progress report is due 45 days prior to the end of the current budget period. And what we need from our sub-award institutions is an estimated unobligated carryover balance, if there is one, updated other support documents. We'll need Commons IDs. None of this information is readily available to us, so we really rely on them. And it's something that we don't want to be requesting at the last minute. Putting them in a crunch puts us in a crunch, and that's not the way to establish good relationships with these individuals. As we also have seen with those cascading budget cuts from NIH in future budget periods, we then have to collaborate with them to request revised budgets. And this all delays the issuance of a sub-award modification for future increments of funding. So you want to be in constant communication with them. It's also important for us to review their invoicing and making sure that they are invoicing in accordance with what was proposed. A lot of times we'll be 6 months into a sub-award period and they've only expensed 10% of their budget. So what does that mean? Are they unable to meet the obligations of their work? Is the effort not being properly recorded? Or are their invoices not going to the right area? So this is where you would want to reach out and let your PI know as well when they meet with their colleagues and collaborators. You haven't billed this in a while. What's going on? Is this something we need to talk about? And then again, with restricted carryover, this is an area where if you ever see that carryover is not automatic, which is typically the case for non-SNAP awards. SNAP is an acronym that NIH uses, which stands for Streamlined Non-Competing Award Procedures, which most FDP institutions have, but are not usually applicable to cooperative agreements or training grants. Carryover has to be extremely accurate. We have found ourselves in more than one case, even within the past year, where FFRs, financial reports submitted by our central office, have been found to be inaccurate because of late sub-award invoicing or because carryover was incorrectly calculated. And then we find ourselves with an unauthorized portion of expenditures that our unit and our central office then have to absorb. It's a nightmare. We don't want to go through that. It takes several months to resolve. So making sure that you impress upon them the importance of accurate carryover. Then our communication with support staff. So our faculty and investigators will have program coordinators, they'll have GRAs, they'll have postdocs who will assume a portion of an administrative function. They'll help them with things like travel requests, things like purchase requests. So communicating with them the expectations of what a good justification is, how we determine allocability, what the timelines are for things. Things like cash advances do not happen overnight. In fact, they don't even happen overnight for gift cards. So making sure that they know institutions as large as a university like ASU, NAU, U of A, these requests and transactions go through several approval processes and through several different offices. So making sure that they understand, let us know what you're going to need well in advance so we can give you an idea of what it's going to take. This is also something true that we've seen for our training grants, where the trainees themselves are constantly following up with our investigators and their staff. Where's my money? Where's my payment this month? These are not things that are like payroll that are automatically triggered to be on a set schedule. These individual transactions have to go through these individual offices, which makes the payment dates unpredictable. And so they need to be reminded and made aware of as early as possible that they can't rely on a fixed schedule to receive these payments. And then lastly, working with our colleagues in other units in auxiliary offices within the institution, we have to often work with tax accounting to make sure that onboarding a consultant is done in the proper way and that they are truly a consultant and not in a payee and employer relationship. Making sure that we have the documentation in place for things like those training stipends. Working with our central compliance office, which at ASU is referred to as the Office of Research Integrity and Assurance, to make sure that our faculty know that if they have a COI, a conflict of interest question, that we can refer them to them, or if they need to make a disclosure, a new disclosure, how they go about doing that. if they are going to be modifying their IRB or their IRCOOK protocols, or they're going to be working with Native American communities, what that entails and where they can find resources for those things. And then reaching out to those individuals when we have questions ourselves about things like potential export controls, if someone is going to be traveling to an area that might be restricted. We also rely heavily on our HR and our payroll teams because we want to make sure that everyone is compensated in a timely fashion, that they are appointed into the correct and appropriate position for what they're doing, that our students are not left on the hook, or that their tuition remission is properly recorded. So working with them, making sure that especially tasks like summer pay or transitions for students, whether they're in graduate research assistant appointments or hourly appointments, if that's going to change in the summer, that we make those as seamless as possible. We're in that process now. And so there's a lot of heavy communication with them and making sure that we know about what's happening with our faculty if they're teaching and using a combination of research funds. Payment processing. For a long time before we refined a lot of our processes, especially with participant stipends and with travel stipends, things of that nature, we were having to follow up with our accounts payable office, our central office, on asking for payment update status. And that's not something that we want to do. We don't want to burn favors to the fullest extent possible. We know how busy everyone is. So making sure that we develop good relationships with them so they know what they need. So we know what they need when they're reviewing, and we make it easy for them so that they can just click approve and get that process going. We also rely heavily on our sub-award team. Sub-awards are a lot of administrative paperwork, which is probably why we can increase our F&A capture back up to $50,000. But working with them to make sure that if they need revised budgets, or if there are going to be sub-award changes that are happening, whether that's triggered by new notice of award, incremental funding. We've also seen a lot of transfers of other investigators that were at sub-award institutions and then they're going to a new institution, keeping communication open there, making sure that if we have an award that does not have automatic carryover, what ends up happening is we create specific accounts for each year. And we've had several awards where within a number of years, say by year 3 of an award, if you have 3 sub-awards, you're going to have nearly 30 sub-accounts under an award. And that's because a sub-award will have a year 1 account, a year 2 account, a year 3 account. Excuse me. And then if you also have supplemental funds, you'll have a sub-award year 1 supplement account, a sub-award year 2 supplement account, and making sure that our sub-awards team who enters and processes those invoices are assigning them to the correct account, because that's some of the scenarios under which we found that our PIs are going in and improving payment of these invoices because they know that the work is being done and the deliverables are being met, but they're not in the details of looking at the specific account number and identifying whether that's the correct account for that period, for that set of funding. And so making sure that you can rely on them to ask and confirm with you, is this the correct account that we need to expense this to? Then we also rely on our central office and our GCOs, who are signing officials for the institution, meaning they have signature authority on submission of RPPRs and FFRs. These processes, because they take so much time in obtaining documents from our sub-awards, often are delayed until the very last week of the deadline. And so being able to work with them, again, making sure that we understand what they need in their review so that we make it easy for them, so that when this routes to them, they can easily hit submit because they see everything there is needed. There are no errors, and that we provided all the information, especially with regard to carryover again. And then another thing that I've noticed in uptick in is that as we may or not be driven by increasing diversity, having international collaborators and postdocs as employees who require a visa endorsement by the institution, and then are working with our visa offices on that, making sure that the PI and the HR teams are aware of the required offer letters and documentation and what can make a visa renewal allocable to the grant, and having an alternate plan in place if that individual leaves their position within a year of employment. And
Before you,
I'm
could
sorry.
you go back for Fernando? I did want to add that all these communication that Fernando outlined and the document that Elena also shared, again, communication, we take a very proactive approach in our college, in our research administrative area, to not only deal with the issues as they come up, but to also be intentional and strategic about these meetings and these communication that we have. We're we're connected. We know that our project coordinators have regular meetings, scheduled meetings. We ensure that we have representation at those meetings so that we can be there to answer any questions and provide support. We also have co-meetings with our finance team. We recently re-engaged our human resources area so that we could communicate with them, get a pulse on any concerns or issues that they want to get a step ahead of. Also just to navigate the process and see where can we improve, where can we adjust things so that, again, we're decreasing that administrative burden for everyone. Trying to be strategic and intentional in these communications is going to be integral to your success in this area.
It may seem like a lot, but it's because Lisa, as one of our leaders, has tried to implement what we refer to as a concierge model for our faculty and our investigators. And I think in that we've been very successful.
Absolutely. I think so as well. So with that, we're going to go into a couple of case studies. I've been here in a supporting role. I really have appreciated Fernando and Elena's take on this. So we're going to talk a couple of cases. So here's something you could drop it in the chat, or you can just think to yourself if you're on site. Here's a case for you. So a PI receives an NOA with significant budget cuts in each year. While excited, the PI worries about how the proposed aims will be completed and the required effort maintained. The PI comes to you for advice. What is one thing you would say or do? And here are some scenarios. Which one would you say or do? A, tell the PI to seek part-time employment at American Airlines so that the foreign travel will also be free. B, explain the options to request revised aims or supplemental funding with the sponsor. C, send the PI a link to GoFundMe. Or D, say we can worry about that when all the money is spent. Now, we'll try to interject a little humor there. Obviously, some of these stand out as like not really the way you want to go, but excuse me, I think the foreign travel one actually get, we'll probably get some hits on that one. But you would definitely want to communicate with the PI and explain the process by which he or she may request your supplemental funding or revise their aims. That there's a process for that with the sponsors. So that would definitely be the option that you would want to choose. Fernando, Elena, any additional takes on that? Main point is communication is key, and the PI is reaching out to you. They come to us because they value, in most cases, value us and value our support and value everything that that we've given them in terms of support across the span of their grants. And so it all goes back to building that rapport so that they understand that these questions will not be, fall on deaf ears, so to speak.
I've come to be a little surprised that when we do have budget reductions, our investigators aren't necessarily aware that these options are available to them. And it's surprising because if they're going to implement a 14% budget cut, of course, you can have a discussion about how am I expected to still complete all of this work.
Yep.
And then helping facilitate all of that.
Absolutely. And that goes with, any sponsor, industry sponsors. Obviously, sometimes they'll push back and try to, cut these budgets as well. Obviously, profitability is on their side. So, that might be a strategic, opportunity for them. We try to be our PI's advocates. And I think that's so important that our PIs view us as that and not some, like was mentioned earlier, adversary or someone that's trying to create hurdles and obstacles. We're here, we're invested in the research, we're invested in them being successful. And I think as long as we take opportunities to develop that rapport and that trust, it all goes hand in hand. So, so key. And let's move on to the second case scenario. It's similar in that we're talking about communication with PI and in this case, also a subrecipient PI. The subrecipient PI has accepted a high-paying consulting position on another grant and informs the PI that effort on the current project needs to be decreased by a whopping 50%. What are two things you would say or do? Say, wow, that's fantastic. Are they looking for other consultants? B, look at the NOA and the terms and conditions and inform the PI whether a reduction in effort will need approval by the sponsor. C, you're down 911 because you do not have enough time to submit a reduction request because it's close of business and TGIF and happy hour is on the schedule. D, inform the PI of their subrecipient monitoring policy at your institution. We had nice gathering last night, so I know some of you guys are probably choosing C, you know, because the happy hour was pretty darn good. But actually, we would want to do B and or C. Look at the terms and conditions, going back to that, you know, review that with the PI, maybe have a, you know, set up a, you know, ad hoc meeting or what have you to look at, you know, the budget, look at, you know, what was required, obviously, and depending upon a sponsor, decreasing by any percent, you know, in most cases for our NIH grants or whatever, 25% is a flag that we need to be mindful of that. So whenever they're looking at decreasing effort of any kind, we need to be having discussions as to what are the requirements of the grant or the sponsor. Also, educating and informing the PI that they're ultimately responsible to be monitoring the progress of the subrecipient PI. If there's a need to replace or get additional help and support because if that effort's been decreased, that might also be impacting the, you know, the scope of work and the aims as well. And that's what alerts the sponsor that there may be issues when that happens. So we do not want to be creating any, you know, red flags when it comes to ability to complete the project on schedule and as designated. Anything else you all want to add?
A couple of things that are triggered from this question for me are one being cognizant of the salary cap that HHS imposes. So
Yeah.
when you have high paid faculty, making sure that they're aware that, yes, you have a budget, but you cannot pay yourself at the equivalent of what your IBS, maybe your institutional based salary, if it exceeds that salary cap. The other is that I've encountered a couple of instances where a PI wants to issue a new subaward, which is something that we thought would require prior approval from NIH. And the response that we've received in both cases from the grants management specialist is that as long as there's not a substantive change in scope of work, that it is within their expanded authorities to issue a new subaward. So that was something interesting for me to learn.
Yeah, and the main key is realizing the impacts on the budget, of course, and moving funds from one line to another and those types of things, because, you know, if, you know, for instance, if they had this and, you know, the PI didn't know and is like, oh, I have all this extra funding, looks like in participants, maybe I can move that over to a sub or whatever, you know, they may not know, but we're like, hey, whoa, you know, that's not, we definitely gotta stop there and have some discussion. So
that's another great reason why it's good to have a separate account for participant support costs so that they don't see that as an available balance in their main account and think
that's true
that they can just spend it. And do we have any questions? I actually think the chat may have been turned off, so we may not. But aside from that, at the conclusion of this session, we are going to be sharing with you some resources of our lessons learned in administering HHS awards. So these are some of the nuanced and specific circumstances that we've seen where we've refined processes and tried to learn from those examples. So we're going to provide an RPPR guide that will help you see what the PI sees and what the workflow looks like for that and all the different parts that are required from that and what you need from your subawards. What an NIH MPI is, which is really just a multi-PI award, non-SNAP, which is the award where it does not include automatic carryover. And in fact, in your RPPR every year, you have to also add a budget request for the future year, the next obligation of funding what it takes to request an NIH second and third no-cost extension, which is very different from, say, NSF. Human subject pay resources, so some of the documents that we rely on heavily when working with our faculty and investigators in implementing those processes, and some of the best practices for training grants, scheduling payments, as I mentioned before, having the sub-accounts, the offer letter and the language that's included in there, the expectations and requirements to continue receiving those funds, and training grant risks, things that we've encountered that were potentially problematic. For example, we tried to have an employee be part of a training grant, and after, even though ASU policy and guidance states in several different areas that it just needs to be paid through payroll, there's no actual mechanism by which we can expense it without incurring ERE or FNA. So that was something that we have learned going forward. ASU employees cannot be participants or trainees on a training grant. Then the targeted demographics and regions required by that, we have another training grant that is intended to support community health workers in the state of Arizona. We came to later find that we had participants and trainees who were outside of the state, and so we had to exclude them from the program going forward. We did have an award also that, without even requesting it in the proposal, included funds for childcare costs for doctoral trainees. So that required a lot of investigation into the specifics of that, because what does childcare costs, like how do we ensure that that's compliant? And it requires a licensed childcare provider, so it can't just be a babysitter. The tax implications of a training stipend. So some of our training stipends are fairly significant, $10,000 in one award, and that is considered taxable income. However, ASU and tax services do not issue 1099 forms or submit that information to the IRS. So it is on an honor system that those individuals are expected to report that as income, as an additional form to their tax filing. Stipend levels that are determined for graduate students, pre-doctoral and postdoctoral trainees, and that is decided by the NIH and announced on a fiscal year basis. And we've also had an award that uniquely had a requirement that our participant support costs had to be at a specific ratio to other direct costs. So if we were going to expense a certain amount in salary, then a certain amount in participant support costs also needed to be expensed. So that ensured that we keep recruitment up and maintained to a certain level. So that's something that requires a lot of manual oversight and forecasting, but it's good to know that it's out there and that it's a potential requirement of your award. It does look like we have some questions. Do you know how NIH views subawards made to our institution's PIs for pilot projects? Are these considered subcontracts or handled differently? They would not necessarily be considered subcontracts. They would still be considered a prime award from NIH to your institution.
Yes.
Which I believe this is maybe an R03.
Yeah, in most cases, subcontracts and subawards are different mechanisms and handled differently. And the institution that has a subaward would also handle their own invoicing and those types of things, is my understanding. Could someone get more specific as to what do you want to know about that question?
Feel free to unmute yourself also, if that would help.
Yes.
I did follow up in the chat. P30 Center for NIH.
The way that we are proposing to handle our P30 is to issue it as a subaward to that institution. So it would not be directly issued to an individual. It would still have all of the requirements and components of a true subaward.
Do we have any other questions or any other questions in the room?
There are no questions in the room.
Well, thank you all for attending our session. We will share all these resources with you. Hope you have a great rest of the conference. Thank you to our moderator as well.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you very much for your time.
If anybody have any additional questions, I am still on site.
Oh, right. And our contact information is listed here at the bottom of this slide. please feel free to reach out. You don't need to be from ASU. We're all here to support the research enterprise of the state of Arizona and the betterment of our community.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank you.
you.